Good day, everyone. We're at the top of the hour, and it's time to begin our live webinar titled Plan, Organize, Submit, a look at the ATE Central archiving process. I'm your host for today's webinar, Mike Lasecki. Let me remind you that the webinar is being recorded, and you'll automatically get a link to the recording. Today's presenters, include, I'll change the screen right there. Get rid of our timer, thank you. Include Rachael Bauer. Rachael is at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and she's the principal investigator at ATE Central. Good day, Rachael. Will you say hello to everyone and introduce your colleague?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. We're thrilled to have all of you with us. Archiving is a topic that is near and dear to our hearts, and we're excited to share some information with you today about that. My colleague Kendra is with us. Kendra, do you just want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Like Rachael mentioned, my name is Kendra Bouda, and I'm Metadata and Information Specialist with ATE Central. I'm responsible for the ATE Central Resource Portal and the archiving service.
All right. So this is yours, Kendra. I'll let you go ahead and discuss the goals.
So our goal today is to answer these three questions here. First, what does ATE Central archive? So we'll take a look at the NSF ATE archiving requirement, talk about the different types of materials that ATE Central collects. We'll review some of the file formats that we recommend, and then we'll touch on three types of intellectual property licenses that NSF encourages all of you to use. We'll then talk about how you would go about archiving your materials with us and look at what happens after you submit your work to ATE Central. Rachael's going to start us off, though, by talking a bit about ATE Central, and I believe we have a poll question for you first.
All right. Well, Kendra's talked a little bit about her background, and we always love to know who's on the webinar with us. So Mike just opened a poll, and we just wanted you to tell us a little bit about yourself. So are you currently affiliated with an ATE grant that was funded in or after 2015, prior, which would be 2014, or not currently funded but writing an AT grant? And then if you click the other button, it's a good opportunity for you to pop your answer into the chat window. You'll see over to the right, there's a chat. Shannon was the last person to put something in there. I'll put something in here just so that it clicks up. There you go. So this is a great place to post any questions as we're going, since we wish you could all talk with us, but we can't all talk during a webinar, so the chat is a great place for you to pop any questions as they come up, and I will pause us at appropriate times. All right, so almost everybody, we have one person who's affiliated with an AT grant that was funded in 2014 or earlier, and we have somebody who is actually working on a grant, but most people are affiliated with grants that were funded in or after 2015. So as it becomes 2019, 2020, I guess that's not very surprising, is it, Kendra? We're getting to the point where we're going to have less and less people who are funded before the requirement was put in place.
Very true.
All right, so I just want to remind those of you who are with us today a little bit about AT Central. AT Central is a project. It's a special project funded by the National Science Foundation as part of ATE, and we're really the information hub and the archive for the program. And our primary purpose is try to amplify the impact of ATE. So we're here to support the work that you all are doing with your projects and centers. We have a resource collection where we collect all the resources that you all are creating with your funding. And then, of course, what we're talking about today is archiving those resources also, and Kendra will explain more about that in just a little bit. We have a variety of services and tools that you can access on our portal. Those relate to things like sustainability and outreach, lots of toolkits and videos and all kinds of great resources that can help you with the work of your project. We do a lot of work to support outreach and dissemination as well. So the archiving support that we offer is a community-driven service. It's something that came about through our discussions with community members and with the National Science Foundation. And one of the things that we try to stress and help folks understand is that archiving helps you with two big components of your project. Well, really three in a way. It helps with sustainability, because one of the things that you can talk about in your reporting is that you will be helping to sustain the work of your project by archiving with AT Central. So these resources that you are spending your time and energy to create will be in the AT Central archive, and they'll be accessible to people after your project or center funding sunsets, and easy for people to find and utilize in educational settings or in other appropriate settings. It also helps with your data management planning. So it's a way to talk about the fact that, again, you're sustaining access to the data that you created as part of your project or center funding. And it also helps with dissemination. It's another way to push the materials that you're creating out through the AT Central portal. We offer things like today's webinar. We offer a number of online resources, guidelines, checklists, all kinds of other support materials. And we will actually also be at the PI conference, which many of you will probably be at also in, surprisingly, just about 5 weeks. And we will be, our session is going to be on Thursday in the morning. I think it's around 10 a.m. Kendra will be doing an archiving session. So you can check for that when the program comes out, and we'd love to see you there. And of course, we'll have a booth also, so you can come visit and chat with us about all of this. So now, without further ado, I'm going to turn this back over to Kendra, who's really going to get into the meat and potatoes of our presentation today and talk about the archive. Kendra?
Thanks, Rachel. So for those of you that have participated in one of our Basics of Archiving webinars before, or if you've been to any of our archiving conference sessions at the PI meeting, the next few slides are going to be a bit of a refresher for you. So the AT Central Archive is a virtual space where the deliverables and select administrative documents created by the AT community are collected, stored, and made available in a digital format. So you'll note here that the word stored is highlighted. Storing resources on AT Central servers is really what differentiates archive resources from other resources in the AT Central resource portal. So let's have a quick look at an example of the difference between the two. So this is an example of an AT Central resource record. The resource record simply contains information that describes a resource. So in this case, we have a PDF. It's titled NVC Handout from 2017. We have a title in our record. Let me see if I can add a little, there we go. Here we have a title, we have a description, we have a URL. Let's see, the URL is down here. That's where the resource can be found online. We also have names of creators and publishers a little bit lower in the record, some subject terms describing what the resource is about, and then more data describing the resource type, the intended audience, and so on below that. Now, because this is an archived resource, there is an attachment associated with that record, and that's what we have circled here in red. So this file is stored on our servers here at AT Central and will therefore remain available long term. So if this resource weren't archived, there would be this URL linking to the resource on someone else's website, but there wouldn't be a copy saved on our own servers. So if the URL were to disappear for any reason, we would no longer have access to it, and would have to remove this resource record from our collection. You'll also note this little archived with ATE Central logo in the right, which is really the easiest way for you to distinguish archived resources from those that we simply link to. So next, let's take a look at the RFP, which discusses what you as grantees are asked to archive. And the majority of you received your grants after 2015, so this does apply to you. So according to the current NSF ATE RFP, essentially any grantees who received funding in or after 2015 are required to archive grant deliverables with ATE Central. These deliverables are to be in a digital and archivable format with any intellectual property clearly displayed on the resource. So once again, we have some highlights here. So let's look at those individually. Deliverables of your project or center are generally described in your grant proposal. They do evolve over time, which is perfectly okay. And generally speaking, deliverables are relatively easy to identify. If you have any issues identifying what those deliverables might be, you're always welcome to ask us for assistance. Most of the materials that we collect fall into one of the first 4 categories that I have listed here. So assessment, instructional, reference, or professional development materials. Assessment materials might include tests, answer keys, grading rubrics, that kind of thing. Instructional materials include activities, case studies, lesson plans, textbooks, tutorials, labs, games. Reference materials usually refer to articles, reports, or career information. And then professional development materials are generally presentations, workshop materials, or video recordings. We also collect what we just call samples. And samples are materials that you've created, like manuals, guides, best practices, or even survey tools, things that you think would be valuable to the AT community as a whole. And then finally, we do collect some administrative documents. These should document the success of your project or center, and these don't necessarily have to be made publicly available through the resource portal. We can also archive those for internal purposes only. The materials that we archive must be available in a digital and archivable format. So not all deliverables are necessarily digital, and they're not even necessarily tangible in nature. So perhaps you're funded to organize a competition or a conference, for example. Neither of those types of activities are inherently digital. However, you may very well have support materials that are available in a digital format, like handouts or presentations, and those are the materials that we do archive. This slide here depicts the file formats that we generally expect to see, along with maximum file sizes that we believe to be reasonable. However, if you do have file formats that are larger in size, please feel free to contact me. Those are perfectly fine. We also know that some of you are using specialized software and produced content with very specific file formats, and we're happy to accept those as well. But if you are producing just general audio, video, visual, textual, or courses in a learning management system, these are generally the file formats that we expect to see. The last part of the RFP is the intellectual property piece. So under the RFP, grantees are encouraged to make their materials available under one of these 3 Creative Commons licenses. Specifically, NSF encourages the use of the attribution share alike, and the attribution non-commercial share alike licenses. These licenses allow you to copy, distribute, transmit, or just generally adapt copyrighted material to varying degrees, as long as they attribute and share the work in the same manner that is specified. So if you do choose to use a Creative Commons license, it must be affixed to the work. At the end of the webinar, I've provided a URL to some resources that will help you with Creative Commons licenses. There'll be a link to the website where you can find information, and there's also some helpful information on how you would actually affix a license to varying types of materials like PDFs or PowerPoints, Word documents, and the such. So I will hand things over back to Rachel for a moment.
All right. So we have a second poll for you. We just like to see kind of where you are on your archiving journey here. So seeking information on archiving either because you're writing a grant or you just want to be better informed, planning to archive with AT Central within the next year, absolutely like ready to go, ready to archive, or something else that you'd like to share. And again, you can share that in the chat. Kendra and I like to tell people that, you know, the earlier the better, just in terms of planning, because the earlier you start, the more you can get all the material that you're creating into a good organizational system. So it's really almost never too early to start the archiving process. All right, so a lot of folks are in that planning to archive, and several of them are just seeking information on archiving, and then a few who are ready to go. So that's great. We have a nice mix, Kendra.
Yeah, and I'm glad to see that people are studying so early.
Yeah, it's really nice. Okay, so let me go to our next. We just want to remind you that these webinars are recorded. There's a whole list of previous webinars, both on archiving and lots of other things too, on our archiving page. It's atcentral.net/webinars. And you can go back and check out the 2017 webinar that we did 2 years ago, which really helps you very specifically to plan your archiving activities and develop a workflow. So it gets into some very specific stuff related to the archiving checklist, which Mike, I believe, has mentioned a couple times, but if you go over to the right, just to where the picture of that checklist is, you'll see that you can download that archiving checklist right from the webinar today. So you can go back and take a look at that, since it's a nice refresher on and more specific information about planning the archiving activities and workflow. Also, if you come to that session we talked about on Thursday of October 24th, I believe, at the PI conference, Kendra will be going over some of this material too with you. Okay, so let's take a little break and get to some questions. The first question that somebody chatted to me privately was just asking if the service was free, or if it's something that they should be writing into their grant, or should be taking out of grant funding. And it is free. You don't need to. There's not a budget. It's part of what we are funded to do, is to help you with the archiving process. Kendra, somebody asked, Irene asked us. It's actually a really good question. I think of my project's website as a resource. After the grant ends, will AT Central maintain my website and my domain name? So it's a great question. Sadly, the answer is no.
So I'll add to that.
Yeah.
Irene, that is a very good question. While we don't maintain the website itself for the domain name, we will look through the website and see what resources are available that we can download. And we will take those and upload them to the website, our website, as resources, and maintain those for you on our servers.
Steve was asking if annual reports or something should be included. And again, we don't usually archive annual reports either, do we, Kendra?
No, we generally do not. Though if you are looking to provide a good example of an annual report somewhere, that might be a good question for Mentor Connect. Rachel, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, the thing to remember, of course, is that the annual reports are something that fundamentally you're archiving with NSF, right? And they contain a lot of data that maybe you may not want to really share with other people outside of your program officer and a few other people, but you certainly could check with Mentor Connect, because I think they are often looking for really good examples of annual reports. So you may want to check with them if you're interested in sharing your report with the community. I think they'd be a better bet in terms of that. And then just trying to see, oh, one other person chatted me and asked if they need more help with archiving. Kendra, they wanted to know if they can reach out individually to you or to the team.
Yes, always. Always. You are more than welcome to contact me directly or anyone at AT Central, and we can either set up a call or find some time that works for you to really walk through the process individually.
All right, great. Well, that's all I have at the moment. We'll probably get more questions as we go along, Kendra, but I think you can move us. All right.
Okay, great. So the next few slides talk about the submission process, specifically how you would submit materials to AT Central using the archive submission form. However, I will say up front that if you do have a large quantity of materials to submit, please don't feel obligated to use the form. You're always welcome to contact me directly, like we just said, and we'll explore other submission options for you, such as Box, Dropbox, Google Folders, something that really makes it easier to submit larger quantities of materials. But to submit materials using the archive submission form, you do need to be logged into the ATE Central website. Creating an account on our website is free. If you don't yet have an account, simply click on the sign-in link in the upper right-hand corner. It's circled here in red for you. And if you already have an account but don't remember your password, there is, and it's a little small, so I'll add this arrow here. There's a little link right here that will help you find your forgotten password. Once you're logged in, you can find the archive submission form at atcentral.net/archiving/submissions, or access the form under the Resources tab at in the navigation bar of our website. There is a link, I think it says Archiving Service, when you click on the tab, and all of our materials are available there. So to begin the archiving process, you would click this Create New Submission button in the bottom right. If you come to this page, Archiving/Submissions, and you do not see that button, that means that you're not logged in yet, and you'll need to log in first to see the button. So for the next 3 slides, we're going to look at different examples of submissions. This one here is the most basic kind of submission that you can make, which is an individual file. Here we have a document, a Word document that is titled imageinterpretation.doc. This could also be a PDF or an audio or video file, for example. When submitting a deliverable using the archive submission form, you should only upload a single file, and it may not exceed 1 gigabyte. Required fields are identified on the form by this yellow circle. It's pretty light here, but you can see that the associated file field is required. This is where you actually upload your document. We also ask for your award number, a contact name, and an email address for you. And then here towards the bottom, you must agree to our terms. These acknowledge that you are either the copyright holder of the material or that you're an authorized representative of the copyright holder, and that we may use, copy, migrate, and modify your materials for preservation and archiving purposes. You will also be verifying that we may distribute your materials freely through the ATE Central resource portal and our social media accounts. If you're submitting materials that you don't want made publicly available, like some of those select administrative documents that I mentioned before, or if you have, let's say, an answer key to a test that you'd rather not upload for students to see, feel free to contact me directly rather than using the submission form, because in order to submit this form, you really do need to accept those terms. All of the other fields that you see here are optional. including the description field. And you're welcome to add anything to this field that you like, such as a brief summary of the resource, information about when and how the materials were created, for example, really anything that you think might be important. And I will note here that we do edit that description field. We don't publish the comments or any of the non-descriptive notes that you jot down in here, so feel free to add any content. And then you can also suggest an ATE area by clicking on the drop down under the description field here. We'll take a look at that and we'll adjust that if needed, but you are welcome to make a suggestion. Finally, there is a little checkbox here at the bottom where you can request additional information on licensing. Checking this box will essentially send you an email with more information about licensing. Now, if you have a handful of files rather than an individual document, for example, you can provide a zip file with related resources. So let's say that you have an activity, a lecture, and some lecture notes that are related to one another. Once again, you should only be uploading one form. So please pop those into a zip file, compress the file, and upload that zip file to the form. That also helps us identify that these materials are in fact very much related to one another. So you'll also note here that in this example, the submitter has used a very consistent method for naming the files. So it's very clear to anyone opening this zip that these files are for the same remote sensing course, that one is an activity, one is a lecture, and one are the lecture notes. The last example that I have here today is sort of the most complicated. This is a submission for an entire academic course. So in this example, the description field is used to tell us a lot about the course itself, like who taught it, where it was taught, what program this course was for. It says here that it's a required course and that the course is divided into 8 modules. If we then look at the file names over here to the right, we know that the course was taught in the fall of 2013. We have both the syllabus and the course schedule in 2 different formats. The main folder structure shows that the zip contains exams, modules, and some type of content related to a research project. In the modules folder, we see those 8 modules that are mentioned in the description, and each module we have some introductory materials, an activity, a lecture, and some lecture notes. So just a quick glance at the description and the file names already provides a lot of information about this course. These file names, they're clear, they're consistent, and easy to navigate, not just by our staff, but also by anyone who comes to the website to use the materials. So when you're organizing and naming your files, you can name them anything that you like. Just try to think about how someone who is not familiar with your project or with the content of your zip would navigate the folder structure, and that can help you come up with some good, clear file names and folder and subfolder organization. Okay, so many of you are PIs, and so this activity report may look familiar to you. ATE Central sends out a report to each of you or to your authorized contact. So if you give us the name of someone on staff who you would prefer to receive these reports, we can send that to them instead. And this report describes the data that we collect about your project or center, about your resources, or about your events. So in this example, we can see that the center has 43, let me add my little arrow here again, 43 resource records in the ATE Central Resource Portal. 35 of those had been archived at the time of this report. And in the 3-month period displayed here, the 43 records were viewed almost 500 times. Below these numbers are the 5 resource titles that were most frequently viewed on the ATE Central Resource Portal. If we have existing resource records for your materials that have not been archived, so you'll recall at the beginning of the presentation I talked a little bit about those resource records that simply link to your websites rather than having that uploaded file. If we have such records for you, you will see in your activity report this little archive button next to any resource that we have a resource record for that we think should be archived. The purpose of this button is to make it very simple for you to archive your materials. So if you were to click on this button in your activity report, it would take you directly to the archive submission form, and that form would already be pre-populated with everything that we know about that particular resource. So in essence, all you really need to do at that point is upload a copy of the form to that associated file field that we saw earlier, accept the terms, and submit. All the other information, your award number, your name, your email, the title of the resource, a brief description, all of that is already pre-populated for you. So this is just really another way that will prompt you to submit your materials for archiving over the course of your grant. Now, once you've submitted something through the archives submission form, when you go to that archiving/submissions page, you're not only going to see that create new submission button, here it is right here, that's still there. You're also going to see this table with all the archive submissions that you've already provided to us. That way you can access anything you've already submitted, and you can check on the archival status of your submissions. Those are provided here. If we have not yet processed your submission, so if we haven't started working on that description and adding additional metadata, you will still see this little edit button, which is circled here in red, and you can go back and make any changes to your submission that you would like. After your submission has been processed, then that little edit button there is going to disappear. Okay, so let's say that I click on this link, this Image Interpretation Lab link right here. Doing so is going to take me to my completed submission form. So once my submission has been processed, and we'll talk a little bit later on about what that will look like, when you go back to your submission, you will see all the data that you submitted originally, your award number, your contact name, your email. But then you're also going to see this little associated resource link. That appears once your resource submission or your submission itself has been processed. So this will link to the published resource record in ATE Central, which will make it much easier for you to find the record that we've created for you based on your submission, and also double check that record to make sure that it really looks the way that you would like it to. Okay, so before I talk about what happens to your materials after you've uploaded everything to the archive submission form and we look at what the process looks like, we're going to take a brief break here for questions, since we covered a lot of material there.
All right, so we do have a question from Steve who's asking if it's okay to submit tests and quizzes without the answer keys. And Kendra, I can't remember, I think it's fine to do, but I know don't we have a way to also keep certain things private so they aren't viewable by anyone? Am I mistaken about that, or am I right? I just can't remember.
You are correct about that. So what we can do is make the tests publicly available for anyone who would like to download those, and then we'll keep a copy of the answer key on file just so that we have that archived, and if you have any stipulations for whom we could provide that to, we can also make a note of that in the record.
Okay, that's what I thought. I thought there was a way to do that, so I'm glad to hear it. So that's an answer for you. And then Terry has asked a question about the single file size. He said, he or she, I don't know if Terry is, I'm not sure about my he. Thank you, Terry. The problem is that they're providing both instructions and virtual lab environments. The 1 gigabyte file size max is too small. We have identified another solution for this. My question is it okay to upload the instructions, documentations to AT Central and provide directions on how to get to the VMs? Would we, I know you've worked with folks to upload much larger things, Kendra, so do you want to just touch base on how that all works?
Yes, so there's actually 2 questions there. The first is, if you have a single file that even in a compressed form is too large and are unable to upload it to the submission form, that's a situation where it's a good idea just to contact me directly. And usually what we'll do then is either just set up a box, Dropbox, or a Google folder that we both have access to, and then that way you can upload your files and I can download them. The second question that's sort of embedded in there is whether or not we will go somewhere and download files from the internet. And the answer to that is always yes. So in fact, if you have everything on your website and it's easy to download from your website, you can just let us know where the material is and that you'd like to archive it, and we will go directly to the website and download it. There is an exception for that, and that is YouTube videos. If you have your content on YouTube, users who are not you, so who do not own the YouTube video, really aren't able to download videos from YouTube. So that's a situation where those files would have to be provided to us, but otherwise, either way is fine. We will download from a website, or you can provide us a link to some type of share file.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. We got cool, awesome. We ended up at okay, they're using Dropbox Plus, so that's good. So it sounds like we have a solution for Terry that will work. The only other thing, we got a question, somebody chatted me a question about whether this is whether the archiving is a requirement or a recommendation from NSF. Kendra, do you want me to take that one?
Yes, why don't you go ahead and talk about that?
Okay, so it is a requirement. There are 2 requirements for grantees. One is to fill out the annual Evaluate community survey, and the other is to archive your deliverables with AT Central. So it is in fact a requirement of your funding. Not that anything, I mean, they're not going to come running after you with, that take your money away if you don't, but it is a requirement. So we strongly encourage you to work with us. We promise we make it as painless as possible. But yes, it is a requirement. And there was also somebody who asked about what the term metadata meant. Kendra, do you want to explain what metadata is, because you used that term?
Sure. Metadata is essentially data about data. So the metadata, when I use that term, I'm referring to all the information that we add to your resource record about your resource. So your resource is, let's say, a PDF. One piece of metadata we add is the title. Another piece is the creator information, the publisher information. So all of the information that we add is metadata. Okay.
Great, Kendra. So I think we're good. We can move on to our next
great. So
topic.
Let's go ahead and perfect. I'm not sure if we have a little bit of a delay, but I'll just go ahead and move forward unless Mike tells me that we're having some delays with the audio. So we have 2 flowcharts here, and those flowcharts are describing the archiving process at AT Central. The first of the flowcharts is describing the archiving process in terms of the resource record itself. So how it's created, published, and reviewed. The second flow chart really depicts the same process, but here we're focusing on communication. What does the communication process around archiving look like? So we're going to talk about these two flow charts individually. So first, a file is submitted to AT Central via the submission form or some other method, which is really what we've been focusing on up until this point. And then depending on the submission, we are either going to create a brand new resource record, or we will amend an existing resource record. So if this is material that we haven't seen before, we're going to create that new record. Or if we have one of those resource records that just has a link to your website in it, we're going to take that existing record and upload your file there. The resource record is then archived, which we'll talk a little bit more in the next few slides, and published. The submitter is represented here first in red during the submission process, and then again in blue during the review process. And really what happens at AT Central is this green part, the processing in between. So the file is submitted, we process it, and then we show that file to the reviewer. The reviewer then is asked to provide some feedback on whether or not that resource is properly archived. So during processing, our staff adds a lot of information, or metadata, which we just defined, to our resources, describing what those materials are. Let me go ahead and remove that arrow. That data that we add makes it possible for others to find the materials they need, either through keyword searching on our website or through some advanced search options. So some of these will look familiar to you. We add the title, the URL, files are uploaded since these are archived resources. We will also add something called series or relation information. So if we have individual resource records for records that need to have their own resource records, but they're in some way related, this is a field that we use to link those resources together. So let's say you have a certificate program, and that certificate program is comprised of 5 classes, and there is a resource record for the content of each of those 5 classes. So we have 5 total. But since they're related, they're all part of the same program, we would add that series data to keep that relationship stable. We have creator and publisher information, then we add the description. Each resource is designated with a ATE area and some other subject vocabularies to make them more discoverable. If the resource has a date, it is added. We describe the resource type. Is it instructional material? Is it reference material? Is it assessment, professional development material, that kind of thing? We add file formats. What language is the resource in? Then we add information about the intended audience, who would be interested in this particular resource. So if it's intended for educators, for learners, for administrators. We also have something called the audience refinement field. Here we try to identify if the resource is appropriate for a very specific subgroup of users. Some of those values might include STEM resources for women or materials for service members and veterans. We identify what the education level or the estimated education level of the resource is. Is it intended for high schoolers or is it intended for college level students? If there's a specific instructional method utilized in the curriculum, let's say it's appropriate for flipped classrooms, we'll identify that in the metadata. And then we add some information about who owns the copyright, whether the materials have a Creative Commons license associated with them. We'll add a screenshot and then a whole bunch of other information that's mostly used for archiving and preservation purposes. So all of that is happening behind the scenes when we're processing your materials. You are not responsible for any of that information. We add all of that content to our resource records. So here we have that second flow chart that depicts the communication process. So once again, it's really the same as the workflow that we just looked at, but we're focusing more on how we communicate with you about the process. So after you submit, either I or Michelle, whom some of you may have already worked with, will receive an email notification that you've made some type of submission on the website. We will then review it and contact you directly with any questions, should we have any. If the submission is considered complete and we are clear on what the content is, we'll pass that on to the catalogers, and the cataloger will receive a notification that there's new archiving ready for processing. The cataloger is the person who adds all of that metadata to the record and then notifies either Michelle or myself that archiving is complete. Michelle or I will then send you an email telling you that your resources have been processed, and we provide links to your newly created resources. So that's this arrow here at the top. The submitter is then asked to review the records, and if you have feedback, here depicted at the bottom, you will then provide that feedback either to Michelle or I, and we'll make sure that information gets back to the catalogers, which is depicted here with these little arrows here. And the process, the record is then recatalogued, and you are then notified again that your archiving is complete. So that is essentially what happens on our end.
All right, we do have a couple of other questions. Somebody asked me, they're the PI, but is it okay to assign the work of the archiving to a staff member, or do we recommend that the PI is the person who works on it? Kendra, do you want to?
Either way is perfectly fine. So anyone who has an ATE Central login can archive materials using the archive submission form or contact me directly. I mean, either way is perfectly fine. The only exception there is with that activity report that we looked at earlier. We can only identify one recipient of the activity report. That recipient is automatically the PI of a project or center. However, if you would prefer that someone else receive the activity reports moving forward, you just need to notify me and I can change that information.
And I would say we've talked about this in the past. You've talked about with this this topic, which is that just planning, if you're going to assign it to someone else, just making sure that it feels like a real plan is in place, right, Kendra? So you're thinking ahead of time, in year one, these are the things we're going to have done, and this is the person who's going to help archive them, or whatever it is, but having a sort of workflow.
Yeah, and actually, many of you have already downloaded the archiving checklist, and one of the first steps that we ask you to consider when planning for archiving is identifying a very specific person who's going to be responsible for archiving your materials. And that's a really good person to collect materials as you create them, so that you're not, scrambling in year 3 of your grant, getting ready to archive, and are starting to look for all the materials that you've created over the years, trying to figure out what computer it's on, what share files you might have put things in. Identifying that person who's responsible for archiving at the very beginning means that that person knows that he, she, or they are responsible for collecting those materials as you progress through your grant. Okay.
I don't think we have any other questions at the moment. Oh, actually, I did get one other question quickly. You showed the example of the full curriculum for a class, Kendra, but somebody else asked me if we take curriculum for things like camps or competitions or workshops as well.
Yes, you are more than welcome to submit those as entire courses. And I will also note that in the example it is a zip file, which is perfectly fine. but many of you probably have all of your course materials in a learning management system. If you are able to export your entire academic course from your learning management system in the form of a IMSCC file, we will accept that file format as well. It does need to be validated. And I see someone talking about Canvas. Yes, Canvas is a great example of a learning management system where you can export your entire academic course as an IMSCC file.
All right, well, I think we are done with questions then. We can move on to the next slide. Which is in fact a poll. So let's hear from you guys. Now that you're more familiar with the archiving process, what would you kind of like help with or more information on? This is great for us as we plan for the PI conference and think about what we're going to be doing next in terms of more services for you all. So it looks like more on preparing materials for archiving, formatting, and licensing and IP. Those are often two of the biggies, which is why they're on here, obviously. And if you want to put some other thing in, you've got an option for other. Okay, we have a question here which just popped up, which I'm just going to bring up, Kendra, since it's related. Is there any certain time we are expected to archive materials? Could we do it all towards the end of the project or in the last year when materials are ready?
That's a very good question. And the answer is you can do it at any time, but it really depends on what makes the most sense for you. So if you're creating material that isn't going to be really complete until the last year of your grant, you can just choose to archive it at the very end of your grant funding, though I would recommend doing that maybe a few months, if possible, before your grant funding actually ends, so that you're not working on this anymore when you don't have any additional funds. But for some of you who are creating materials sort of on an ongoing basis throughout the duration of your grant, you can just submit those periodically, whatever makes sense for you. And again, if you have a copy of the archiving checklist, it's one of the questions that you're really asked to think about is what would make sense for you given the deliverables of your project.
And if you have something done early, like you finished something, even if it's a smaller thing, there's no problem with archiving that early, and it helps you get a sense of the process. So then you really understand, so that you're not kind of figuring the process out in that third year when you're trying to do final reports and all kinds of other things too. So, I think it's not a bad idea to archive something early if you can, just so that you start to get a sense of the whole process.
And I will add that once you archive something, it's not that you can never, ever change that material again. In fact, we do archive previous versions. So if you have a handbook or something that you might edit every year and tweak a few things and issue a new version, we can start archiving your 2019 handbook now. And in 2020, when your next resource comes out, we will move that down to what we call the previous version field, which you can have either viewable or not viewable, and then archive your most recent copy of that handbook.
That's great. And there are a couple questions just popped up. Is the archiving associated with the annual report? It isn't associated, but it is certainly, if you're archiving, it's a great thing to mention in your annual report, right? So it's something that you can talk about. Can we refer to the ATE in the, yes, so you can. They're two different things. Your annual report is something you do through research.gov, which is the online portal that you do your reporting through. The archive is part of AT Central. So they are completely independent, but you can certainly mention your archiving in that annual report as an achievement of the year.
So, and I'll just add one more thing here, since I'm looking at the results and it looks like a lot of people are interested in more information about preparing materials for archiving and addressing licensing. If you are available on that Thursday morning at the PI conference, our workshop it's not a workshop, our session that we're hosting really is intended to address individual questions and to work on your archiving plan. So you can bring the types of materials that you know you want to archive and ask very specific questions and get assistance both from me and then also from Corey Halpin, who's also on our staff here, and he can address a lot of licensing and IP related questions for you.
All right, that's great. Mike, I think you can close the poll now. Okay.
So here are a few links that might be of interest to you. These slides, like both Rachel and Mike have mentioned before, will be made available, so you can always go back and look at them. The first few are links to materials on our website under the Resources tab, and then the last two are links that should provide you with a little more information about copyright and Creative Commons licenses. Again, we will be at the PI conference, and even if you can't make it to our session, we have our booth, booth number 1 this year, and we will be at our booth for both showcase days on the 23rd and the 24th. And before we wrap things up here, one final note from me is if there's anything that you take away from this webinar, it's that the archiving requirement, the archiving process, it's really meant to be as easy as possible for you. We try to do as much of the work on our end as we possibly can. So the one thing that you really just need to do is get your materials to us. In any way that you might be able to do that, as long as you get those materials to us, we'll take care of the rest for you. So, and with that,
okay, we want to thank you guys, and we also want you to take our survey. Mike's going to open up a survey. We always want to hear from you. The survey may pop up in a separate window, or he will also put the link in case you're not getting, if you're not seeing the survey. Mike will put something in so you can click on the link. This survey helps us get feedback from you about what kind of job we're doing, and of course, like all of us, we're doing evaluation for the National Science Foundation, and this is part of the way we evaluate the deliverables of our grant of AT Central. Does anyone have a final question or anything that they'd like to ask before we officially close shop here? I know some of you are filling out the survey, but if there's someone who's filled it out and has a question, we're happy to answer one last question. Doesn't look like it. But of course, as Kendra mentioned, you are welcome to email us at any time with questions about archiving or anything else that AT Central can help with, sustainability or outreach. Kendra, any last things you'd like to mention before we officially end?
No, just thank you to everyone for joining us today, and I look forward to hearing from some of you and hopefully meeting you at the PI meeting.
Absolutely.
Rachel,
I think
I'll break
this
in.
officially.
Right.
Oh, there he is. Yep.
I'm sorry, Rachel. I'll break in as host and let everybody know that this officially ends the audio part of our webinar. I want to thank Kendra and Rachel for excellent presentation today and all the questions that you fielded very, very well. Remember, colleagues, this webinar is being recorded and you'll automatically get a link to that recording. I'll leave the system open for about 2 more minutes so you can complete that survey. Thank you and goodbye for today.